Welcome to Northern Kentucky, a metropolitan area spanning two states. On the north side is the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, and on the Kentucky side is the Kentucky-Cincinnati International Airport. Despite this area having a small Hispanic population, it seems that recently almost half of the arrests in this area are Hispanics, most of them being targeted for immigration arrests. This region where Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio meet have the highest drug overdose death rates of anywhere in the United States, and it isn't just recent with the fentanyl crisis. This area, going all the way back to the 2010s, has always led the nation in overdose deaths. You would think law enforcement would be proactive about drug arrests in this area, but individuals like this guy here who were arrested for fentanyl possession were really arrested because they had some other pending warrants from somewhere else, and when they arrested the individual, they found the drugs on him. In other words, despite the fact that this area is plagued with drugs, law enforcement seems to do very little about it, and it hasn't done much about it since 2010. This area is filled with drugs more than anywhere else on earth, definitely more than anywhere else in the United States. The overdose death rates out here are insane. Many people blame the influx of Hispanics as the reason these drugs are here, but you can't forget that this area has been plagued with drug overdose rates that are nation leading for decades now, and in the areas where this is happening the most, you also have the lowest percentage of foreign-born residents. Many arrests in the state of Kentucky even indicate that the precursors for the fentanyl and other analogs of that drug are actually being manufactured or imported directly into Kentucky. But while the state of Kentucky is flooded with drugs, and it has been for decades, law enforcement hasn't been proactive about resolving that issue. But recently they've become very proactive about arresting and detaining people they can profile for being Hispanic, and recently, specifically in the last few days, they have seriously stepped up the arrest of undocumented people, arresting them for immigration violations, particularly in the northern Kentucky metropolitan area, suburbs like Covington that are outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio, on the Kentucky side. And that's what we're going to look at on today's video. This individual of Nicaraguan background was arrested in Sarasota, Florida just today, and he has an ICE immigration hold, but he was driving under the influence with a minor in the vehicle. The DUI arrest led to his deportation, but here in Kentucky, I guess they're just snatching people off the street with police profiling. Most people who are being arrested for immigration here have no other pending criminal charges. They're just individuals that law enforcement profiles and lifts off the street, despite the fact they haven't committed any criminal infractions, like this individual driving under the influence with a minor in the car. Now, for this individual in Florida, we just ordered the body cam footage. Now, depending on which agency made the arrest, we may be able to get it. And if we get it, you guys will see that soon on our YouTube channel. But in the state of Kentucky, only residents of the state are allowed to pull body cam footage. While I would love to pull this footage, in the state of Kentucky, only people that live in the Commonwealth are allowed to pull this footage. So if you live in the state of Kentucky, perhaps this would be a good endeavor for you if you're a YouTube creator to start to pull some of these body cam footages. Of course, most residents of Kentucky know that living in Kentucky and pulling body cam footage for these types of arrests will probably bring you some really, really unwanted law enforcement attention. It's not a problem here in the state of Florida, but these southern states like Kentucky just move a little differently. In the case of the state of Alabama, for example, I did some research on pulling body cam footage there, and only the person who is in the video is allowed to pull that information, in which case the media isn't able to access these Freedom of Information Acts. Now, the Freedom of Information Act comes through press freedom, which is what's protected by the Constitution, yet states like Kentucky and Alabama have found ways to infringe on what should be freedom of information. Nonetheless, that's why you don't live in states like Kentucky and Alabama, where your rights are constantly being infringed on. Here in the state of Florida, for the most part, law enforcement agencies that have a good reputation provide that information, And it's not a surprise that the law enforcement agencies that have the worst reputation for due process just also happen the ones that have the most impediments to obtaining Freedom of Information Act requests. What I'm really trying to tell you guys is I was willing to pull these arrests, but the state of Kentucky and Alabama won't give it to you. The most notable of all the arrests in northern Kentucky is this individual who I am almost certain is a Bosnian national, most likely a U.S. citizen, who was arrested for importing fentanyl analogs like carfentanil. This individual is by occupation a cybersecurity expert, and it seems that he was arrested because somebody overdosed with a pill that he sold him the previous day. But of course, the real cybersecurity experts in the state of Kentucky were able to decipher by looking at the cell phone of the person who overdosed where he obtained the pills that most likely led to his death, discovering that this individual, most likely of Bosnian origin, was the individual who was importing these dangerous drugs into the state of Kentucky, leading to an overdose death. Now, while he has been charged with importing fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, so far they haven't charged him with homicide or manslaughter, but it's possible that those charges will be pending. But there is no ICE detainer for him. Most Bosnian nationals in Kentucky came during the 90s. These are not political refugees, they're political exiles. They have a special international protection. These individuals are going to be U.S. citizens, not deportable. So you have a U.S. citizen arrested for possession of fentanyl, and you have a Bosnian arrested for importing the fentanyl. But then you have just very few other drug arrests in this area that you would think, with how prevalent drug addiction is here, they would have crap loads of drug arrests, but they don't. What they have crap loads of is people being arrested for immigration. So did these individuals commit horrendous crimes? A few of them had domestic charges. Let's go over those. This is Noé. He was recently arrested here in northern Kentucky with domestic violence causing minor injury, and he was placed on a detainer for an immigration hold. Some of these ICE arrests in Kentucky are interesting. Like this individual here, he's being charged with speeding over 16 miles an hour in a moped. Who knew a moped could go 16 miles per hour above the speed limit? He didn't have insurance, and he didn't have a moped operational license. So he figured since he didn't have a driver's license, he could drive a moped very fast apparently, but that's not the way things work. If I had to take a guess, he's most likely Mexican or Guatemalan. And well, when you're engaging in police profiling, these are just the type of interesting arrests that you have and interesting charges that you see that are going to be seen nowhere else in America. If this individual lived in Florida where I live, I'd get the body cam footage to see exactly how this interesting collection of criminal charges was put together. But again, in Kentucky, you're probably not going to see it. Here in Florida, when I see individuals arrested with interesting collection of charges like this individual, I'll instantly pull the body cam footage and learn more about the circumstances. But in the case of Kentucky, I guess we just never really know. Most of the time, it's people doing absolutely ridiculous things like what these charges would suggest. In his case, driving a moped extraordinarily fast. But that's kind of what happens when you don't have accountability or transparency. People just have to guess and wonder what exactly went down. When I pull these body cam arrests of this nature in the state of Florida, I have discovered that people really are doing some interesting behavior. If you've been watching my body cam arrests of undocumented people here in Florida, I know it hasn't been very popular, but I guess today clickbait matters more than real truthful information. And I guess my truthful information, body cam arrests of actual undocumented people breaking the law who get deported, doesn't seem that relevant because it isn't a clickbait. And that's kind of the irony of today's situation with immigration, is that real news information like what I'm pulling together recently doesn't seem to be newsworthy. But catch yourself with somebody sharing some false information about a raid and it goes viral. So that's just human nature, where clickbait sells and real information doesn't seem attractive. This individual here is a weekender. He just goes to jail for the weekend, because during the week he's busy working or something. Meet Kelton. He was being arrested for receiving stolen property over $10,000. He has an ICE immigration hold on him. If I had to guess his nationality, probably Nicaraguan. And I'm just going to warn you before we move forward with today's list. In Kentucky, there's chicken plants, there's hog plants, and then there's a lot of horse country. The types of immigrants that this part of the country attracts are the types of immigrants that are working with like animals. They're not exactly like driving vehicles and climbing up on roofs and building houses. These are kind of like from the mountains. A lot of these individuals barely even speak Spanish. They're most likely going to speak a Central American dialect. So you're not getting like the cream of the crop when it comes to immigrants in this metropolitan area. When I look at these photos and see their names and their information, you can almost decipher that these are people like from the mountains. They're kind of indigenous. A lot of them are practically barely going to speak a lot of Spanish. So they're individuals that don't have a lot of educational attainment. They're just kind of the least valuable workers that you're going to find. And you can just look at their photos and kind of tell that these are not the type of individuals that are going to find themselves like in Florida building houses. These are people that work in agriculture in Kentucky. So they're not exactly the most educated. A lot of them don't even speak Spanish, let alone English. So this is kind of the type of immigrants that this metropolitan area attracts. If I had to take a guess on this individual's nationality, I'd say he's maybe Nicaraguan. Meet Raymundo. He has an immigration hold. He may be Mexican, Guatemalan, or Honduran, kind of hard to tell. Meet Josue. He has an immigration hold with no other charges. He's probably Central American or Mexican. Now, in northern Kentucky, when they arrest somebody, they actually publish who the specific officer was who made the arrest by name. And that's probably because of the African American community wanting to know if particular officers are making more black arrests or not. But in the case of Hispanics, these arrests are being done by other agencies like ICE or immigration, so we really don't know who the arresting officers are. Now, overwhelmingly, most of the undocumented people being arrested up here are just being charged with immigration violations and no actual criminal charges. But then there's Edgar. He got himself in trouble with a aggravated assault of some sort, battery, domestic nature. Individuals like this just kind of carve out their own path in life, you know? Then they get picked up in some random raid. They actually draw the attention to themselves with domestic incidents, bringing police attention upon themselves, ensuring their own deportations. Hard to feel any sympathy for people like this who kind of bring it upon themselves. And there's this individual in Covington, Kentucky, Francisco. He was intoxicated in public, he was disorderly, and on top of that, he resisted arrest without violence. So again, individuals, they just kind of carve out their own path in life. They weren't picked up randomly. They just kind of decided to do stupid things and win stupid prizes, like his immigration hold. Hairstyle of this individual kind of makes me think of Central America indigenous. One Chinese guy. Now, it costs a lot of money to get smuggled from China to the United States. Probably enough money to where he could have comfortably stayed in China and lived great over there, and not have to pay to get smuggled over here to get deported. So probably a lot of money down the drain. Now, I'm not exactly sure on what it costs to get transferred from China to here, but from what I understand, depending on how you do it, 50 to 100K. Imagine having 50 to 100K in China and deciding that you want to come here to the United States to get deported. It just seems like a lot of money in the wrong direction. There are individuals who kind of sneak into containers and somehow manage to voyage to the United States. How this guy ended up in Kentucky from China undocumented, I have no idea. That is one long and expensive journey. I went to school in Kentucky, and they used to teach us that if you drilled a hole from Kentucky and went to the other side of the world, you end up in China. So this guy literally drilled his way halfway around the world. Now, the state of Kentucky doesn't publish nationalities of arrest, but if I had to take an educated guess, I'm going to guess it's probably number one, Mexicans, followed by Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, and then Venezuelans and Dominicans, judging by the photos. By the way, if you're Hispanic living in the Cincinnati or northern Kentucky area, how do you like living there? Do you feel the pressure of these immigration raids? Do you feel like there's just profiling people? Let me know how you feel. If you're Puerto Rican, Cuban, or any other nationality living legally in the state of Kentucky, how has it been for you? I'd be really curious to get your opinion. I know in Louisville, Kentucky, just down the road, there's a lot of Cubans, and they like the city of Louisville. But Cincinnati is a little bit different of a reputation. I know Louisville and Lexington have a pretty good reputation among the Latino communities where the people there feel comfortable. But that kind of changes rapidly moving into Cincinnati, Dayton, Springfield. it kind of goes to crap quickly when you go north of that river. But anyways, if you're a Latino living in this part of the country, let me know how you feel out there. Now this is Sergio. He was arrested up there, and he's got an ICE immigration hold for an alcohol open container in public. Does anybody know what's up with los bookies and temerario looking haircuts in Kentucky among Latinos? Is that a thing up there? Because it sure as crap isn't here in Florida. Now, as of most recently, according to the CDC, Kentucky has the 6th highest overdose death rate, and Ohio has the 9th highest. West Virginia, not far away, is at number 1. So this region of the country to this day continues to have the highest overdose death rates. Now, back in 2014, you can see that this area of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia and Ohio led the nation in overdoses. That was before COVID, and that was before fentanyl really took off. So this is an area that's been dealing with this problem for a very long time. It isn't recent. In fact, back in 2015, it was first, third, and fourth worst in the nation. So even before COVID and before all the things that have happened recently, this area has been leading the nation for overdoses. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's that many drug arrests out here. And the few drug arrests that I did found seem to be connected to other arrests for other reasons, like the individual who had an out-of-county warrant. They went to grab him, and he happened to have fentanyl on him. The guy arrested for importing was because he overdosed somebody who happened to have the transaction information on his cell phone. So that seems like a pretty straightforward arrest. It doesn't seem like law enforcement here in this part of Kentucky is very proactive about the things that are probably more important in their community. I mean, look at the fact that this area for decades now has been plagued with the worst overdose crisis in the country, and law enforcement has been very, very hesitant to do much about it. But now all of a sudden, half of their arrests in this area happen to be undocumented people. It just makes you scratch your head and wonder how priorities versus reality, the real problems that Eastern Kentucky has versus what they believe is a problem, how much effort they're willing to put into something like racism and hate for other people, but how little they are to actually fix the problems that are plaguing their community. Typical protocol for the United States, able to tackle immigration very profoundly apparently here, an area with very few Latinos where now half of their jails are full of Hispanics because of immigration arrests. But for decades, hundreds and tens of thousands of people have been dying out here from drug overdoses with very little law enforcement effort. Seems like they got their priorities twisted pretty bad in Kentucky. I mean, even here in Bradenton and Sarasota, where drug overdose rates are somewhat less than up there, or considerably less, you could say, than there, law enforcement makes a lot more drug-related arrests. Basically, the idea is that here in Kentucky, drug arrests simply are not a priority for law enforcement. And now, with the case of immigration, I mean, we would assume that these individuals are mostly being arrested for ICE immigration holds, which means these are non-probable cause detentions. These are police profiling detentions. They're being done by agencies that do not release information about who the officers are in a state that already has laws that prevents you from access to Freedom of Information Act, where you could get a video footage for these arrests. Basically, complete impunity, complete lack of accountability, in a state that can make immigration a huge priority, but does nothing about the things that have actually been plaguing Kentucky forever. I used to live in Kentucky. It's a very affordable state. Obviously, not everybody's racist here. There's a lot of backwards people in Kentucky. There's no doubt about that. But after living in Kentucky, despite the affordability, there's one thing about Kentucky that would keep me from wanting to live in this state unless I absolutely had to. One, how profoundly bad the drug problem is. Louisville, Kentucky being among the top 6 urban areas with the worst overdose death rates. There's been years where it's been over 70 per 100,000. Only San Francisco and Indianapolis and Philly have higher overdose death rates. Louisville, for example, is a city that has extraordinarily high homicide rates, just like Cincinnati. So these cities are dangerous. They have a lot of drugs. And while they are affordable, the crime, mostly the drugs and violence in this area, would keep me from wanting to live out here. Other than that, they're both beautiful cities. Both Louisville and Cincinnati are gorgeous cities with a lot of history, a lot of culture. It's really the violence and drugs that make living in these places somewhat unbearable. Louisville, Kentucky has over 20,000 Cubans. Overwhelmingly, most of them are legal. Now, the analytics for incomes in Louisville for Cubans is pretty bad. Kentucky is the sixth worst state for Latino incomes in the United States. So Kentucky, when it comes to Latino incomes, is at the bottom of the barrel. Now, the counties like Breckenridge and just the outskirts of Louisville, you could say, all those rural counties that wrap around Louisville, not per se Jefferson County, but all the rural counties that wrap around Louisville have some of the highest incomes for Latinos of anywhere in the country. But you have to remember that those were Cubans that came during the 90s and they established themselves in the Louisville area. Now they live in the outskirts of Louisville and they're doing pretty good. Breckenridge County, for example, is tied at number one for the highest Latino incomes in the United States at over $250,000. Most of those are going to be Cubans. So in the rural counties outside of Louisville, there's a lot of Cubans that are legal and are doing very well and prospering extremely well in rural Kentucky. But this is an area of a lot of contrast. I mean, it's one of those situations where the Cuban community back then was given opportunities and they were very successful. Along the Ohio River, there's also a lot of industry related to boats, barges, and transportation. And a lot of Cubans are doing welding work around there and other little things related to those industries. And they've made a lot of money. They've started businesses and they're doing really well. So the story of Kentucky when it comes to Latinos is a conflicting one. Very good analytics for Cubans that came early and are doing well in the outskirts of Louisville. But overall, when you look at the entirety of the Hispanic community in Kentucky, the sixth lowest incomes. I was recently in Lexington, and I did a fairly good job of trying to talk to as many Latinos as I could. Predominantly, they were Mexican that are working construction and agriculture and farms and building farms and, stables for people and stuff like that out there by Lexington. I just blew a stop sign, my bad. And out there, it really seemed like they were happy with their job opportunities, and these are rural areas. Kentucky is horse country, and without a doubt, people out there know who the best animal caregivers are. They have individuals from Mexico particularly who are very intimately aware of the animal's health, the medicines they can give them. They know when the animals are sick. These are types of individuals that, if you have animals, they're very in tune with the animal's health. And if your animals are going to be competing, they're going to have to be in top health. So many people in that part of Kentucky, even in really rural areas, you'll see a large number of people working in farms and in stables and horse country. Those individuals are paid very well and they live really good. And the people in the community appreciate them because, horse country, that is their pride. That's what they're most proud of in Kentucky. And without these individuals, the health of those animals wouldn't exist. It's their knowledge, their experience, and their ability to handle these animals and work in some pretty difficult conditions that makes this population be able to thrive out there. But when you look at northern Kentucky, in this area here in the outskirts of Cincinnati, it's kind of questionable what role a large percentage of undocumented people with very little education could present. It's just one of those deals where the United States just really doesn't need poor, uneducated immigrants. And in Kentucky, these arrests that I'm seeing here, you're kind of looking at nothing more than that. I wouldn't doubt some of these individuals can barely speak Spanish, let alone English. But that's the situation in Kentucky. In Kenton County, Covington area up there, northern Kentucky, they're arresting at least 4 to 5 people every single day who are undocumented and facing no other criminal charges. That's disproportionately large for an area that doesn't have that big of a population. So they're definitely going heavy on Latinos, probably more than anywhere I've seen so far. And like I said, the state of Kentucky has both extremes. In Lexington, you have the Mexicans that are working directly in horse country, very appreciated community. And in Louisville, you have the Cuban community that's established. And a lot of them are living very well in the outskirts of Louisville. All of them are mostly legal, with the exception of recent arrivals, of course. But here in Cincinnati, northern Kentucky, it doesn't seem like the people that are being arrested here are good candidates for citizenship either way. I mean, You have different communities with different demographics, different necessities, and this particular community doesn't seem like it fits the profile for long term stability in the United States either way. These are individuals who don't even seem like they have the intention to stay in the United States. So, different communities have different intentions and purposes for being here. In a state like Kentucky that's very badly educated, education really isn't the best in Kentucky. People in Kentucky are just kind of, well, there's no nice way of saying it, people from Kentucky. And they're not very educated. They don't have a lot of attainment. So for them to bring more people that are also of the same low education standard as them, it doesn't really check out. Keep in mind that West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky also have the highest percentage of people in the population who are taking food stamps. These are individuals in these parts of the country that prefer the easy life leeching off the system. So when people come along and start working really hard, they just don't like to see that. I mean, keep in mind, in an area where people are used to leeching off the government, the notion of hardworking immigrants isn't going to sit well in a place where people are just used to leeching off the government and leaving fat off the hog, or high off the hog, or whatever the crap they say out there. Or they are the hog, dang it.